Hello fiber friends and welcome to a spinning video on the Jilly and Eve channel. I'm Evie, I spin yarn, and today I'm going to show you one of the ways that I like to spin locks. And I'm going to put that yarn, that locks spun yarn, into a project because so often I make these very cool textured yarns and then people say, what do you do with it? And I give some ideas, but it really helps to have something visual to just look at and say, oh, that's something I could do. So that is what we are up to today. One of my subscribers so very generously sent me an amazing goodie package, and these locks were part of that box. Aren't they gorgeous? They're hand dyed, and she also sent some yarn with it, this yarn here. One of the things that I often say is a great way to use locks in a project is to spin them into a very textured yarn with just so many curls and coils and bumps and lumps and just a cool chunky textured yarn, and then to use that yarn as an accent in an overall piece, like a stripe in a hat or a piece of a color work or cuffs or something like that. So I thought, we have enough yarn here, let's do exactly that. So I knit up, just kind of off the top of my head, I made half, the top half, the dome half of a hat. Here it is. It looks a little goofy if I wear it because it's the top half. Yeah, it's not finished. And then I also made two fingerless mitts or gloves or whatever you would call these. And these are short. So we have the top half of a hat and some short gloves. I'm going to show you how I prep these locks, then we will spin them up, and then we will add them to these knit pieces to make a set with a hat and two mitts with cool cuffs and brim that are all coordinating. I think it's going to be a really fun, cool project, so make sure you watch to the end to see how it turns out. Let's get started by prepping these locks. Let's talk about the term locks, because this is another one of those terms within our spinning vocabulary that has multiple meanings and it can be kind of confusing. Technically, a lock is the way that the wool naturally kind of clumps together. It's a piece of the wool staple as it comes off of the fleece of the animal. And a lock can be blocky with a lot of crimp in it. The fine wools tend to look more that way. Or it can be long and lustrous and have more of a curl shape to it than a crimp. And so when we talk about spinning locks, I mean, anytime you spin wool, you're technically spinning locks because that's, I mean, it's just a piece of wool. But but oftentimes when we talk about spinning locks, what we're talking about is the long, curly, kind of lustrous. It has more of a drape to it than a springy crimp, but it can be confusing as to how exactly we should spin those because they certainly are a little bit unprepared when we talk about in terms of spinning locks like this. There are many different ways that you can prepare the locks for spinning, and I can't cover all of those different ways in one single video. So I'm just going to show you what I'm going to do with these today. And this is one of my favorite methods because it doesn't require any special equipment. There's no blending board, hand cards, any of that required. You can just do this with your pile of locks and your fingers. And if you have a spindle or a wheel or an e-spinner, you can spin this way. So it's a really accessible way to spin up the locks that you may have. It just takes a little bit of hand floofing. The point of floofing these locks is to get them to open up so that the ends of the lock are not stuck together, and when they are opened up and the ends of the wool frizzes out, it's able to grab onto neighboring bits of wool when it gets twisted, and that holds it together. And that's what makes our yarn have integrity so it doesn't fall apart. How much to floof is a matter of what you plan to do with your final lock spun yarn. If you want to have a lot of texture in the yarn, then err on the side of less floofing. But if you want it to be a little more incorporated, a little smoother, and a little less rambunctious in your final yarn, then you'll want to do a little extra floofing. Here are the locks. They are all fluffed up, and as you can see, I did leave a lot of the texture in there. They still have a lot of their curly ends, but I made sure that they're fluffed up enough that the fuzziness of each lock is going to be able to grab onto the fuzziness of their neighboring locks, and that, with the twist, will keep everything together in the yarn so it doesn't fall apart. I think one of the things that's so fascinating about the history of fiber arts is to look at how breeds of sheep have been popular or not for their specific wool characteristics, depending on fashion or function. The long, lustrous, curly-locked breeds of England, like the Leicesters, the blue-faced Leicester, those Leicester long wools, were so important historically to the economy of England because of the type of wool that they were able to produce. Think about the kind of fabric you want to have if you maybe don't have all of the modern conveniences that we have and are used to today. You want something that's very strong and very sturdy, right? So these long wools could be combed and they could be tightly spun, tightly woven to create a very sturdy and durable fabric that would be very hard wearing. Now I think a lot of people have this next to skin, soft, kind of bouncy, fuzzy, crimpy kind of thing that is really appealing if you're going to be knitting with your yarn because it's soft next to your skin. But you know, historically people would wear multiple layers and the wool would not necessarily be even worn next to the skin. You would probably have a layer of something, maybe linen, between you and the wool. So the wool would be able to be a little bit more durable, possibly more coarse than what we're kind of used to today. So I just think some of those things are interesting to consider. If you're looking for a breed of sheep that has these kinds of long curly locks like this, look for some of the Leicesters, like a blue-faced Leicester. Just the Leicester long wools would be great. Wensleydale, Lincoln has some of those long curly locks. There are so many breeds of sheep, I couldn't possibly name them all here, but that might be a good place to start if you are looking for some long lustrous locks to play around with like these. I'm not exactly sure which breed they are, but they're probably in that family. Mohair is another way to go if you want to find long curly kinds of textures to work with. You'll have to experiment. Every animal is different and different fleeces have different characteristics. So have fun experimenting and exploring. All right, enough of that rabbit trail. Let's get spinning. Some people have asked if you spin S or Z for knitting or crocheting, if all of that matters, and it can, but it doesn't have to. If you are spinning a low twist yarn, you might see an effect. And so because of that, and because I'm familiar with my method of knitting and how my yarn responds when I knit with it, I am going to spin this with S twist, which is counterclockwise twist, because I do plan to knit with this as a singles yarn and I do not want it to unravel as I'm knitting in the round. I do want to have my tension a little stronger and I want to pull back against the tension. And the reason for that, the trick for that, is that pulling back on it is going to help that twist to travel up the yarn as I'm spinning. So if I'm struggling and I feel like I have all these locks here, but the twist is staying in the thin spots and it's not traveling into my fiber supply, increasing the tension is a good way to overcome that. I am just taking handfuls of the locks and I'm holding them in my fiber supply hand and keeping everything kind of blobbed up on top, floofed up on top. I'm letting the twist travel into my supply of fiber in my hand, and as it does, it's kind of grabbing onto its neighbors and bringing them along. And that is how, well, see, this one didn't grab, so I'm gonna floof it just a little extra, and then it should grab. Yep, here we go. So if I keep pulling back it keeps bringing the twist up, even overcoming those thicker sections. So that helps keep this yarn moving. We don't want it to over twist. The floofier it is, the more it's going to let that texture pop out. If your yarn breaks while you're spinning, just make sure the end is good and floofed out, a couple inches in. Lay it into your next handful of fiber, get that twist going, and then it should start picking up on some of the neighboring floof, and then you can draft it out a little bit. But this whole yarn is haphazard because it's textured and it's just going to do what it wants. It's going to flow and curl. I saved a couple locks just to put into my distaff day box. A little piece of every spin goes in there. So this is definitely a yarn that you have to really let go of that perfectionist quality if that's something that you have, and just let the yarn happen how it happened. Let the locks come as they are, and let them do their thing, and just trust that in the end you're going to have a fantastic skein of lock spun yarn. I'm ready to go knit this into my hat and my fingerless gloves, mittens. I guess if it doesn't have a top to show fingers or not, you can't really say, how do you know if it's gloves or mittens? I mean, if it's fingerless, it has to be gloves. If it's topless, it has to be a mitten. Yikes! Okay, I'm gonna go knit this into my hand warmers, and I'll show you how I'm doing that. When I knit this is the hat, and I did the same thing on the gloves. I did some yarn overs and made these little holes. Having these yarn overs in the fabric, in the border, I find it helpful for a couple of reasons. One, if you wanted to, you could easily switch into crochet and use those holes to pick up a very bulky yarn. So that's kind of the other thing I like about it, is that it allows a gauge change. Here's an example. I have this lock here that's very fluffy, and so coming into this yarn over space, there's plenty of room to bring that through as a new stitch without affecting the edging or border that's already there. But this yarn is thin enough that what I'm doing is picking up the stitch in between, and I realize I'm knitting with one needle, but I'm picking up on fabric that already exists, so I don't really need the other needle yet. And then I'm going into the yarn over hole and treating that like a stitch, and I'm just doing that all the way around to pick it up, and that is attaching it above this row of yarn overs that I think is going to just make kind of a really pretty little edging. So we'll see how that goes. I finished the knitting, the project is complete, and I'm so excited to give you a big reveal of my hand warmers. Here they are, with the lock spin as the cuff on each one, and the hat came out really cute. It's kind of a cloche style, and I like it so much. There it is. So you can see how you can use a very highly textured yarn as an accent in a project by using it as a brim. I still want to do some crazy textured stuff in like the yoke of a sweater with a colorwork pattern. I think that would be really cool, but that will be some future project. But we did get these done, so that's awesome. If you want to see some up close pictures of this, I will have that over on my Instagram, so you can always check that out. And I do have some of the yarn left. I have several yards here, so maybe that will find its way into another project someday, perhaps weaving or something, I don't know, but it's always good to have a fun yarn in your stash. All right, friends, I'll see you in the next video. Happy spinning!